Here at Seasoned Gaming, we see a lot of interesting conversations that happen through social media, websites, and with the eve of E3 right around the corner, we did kind of want to talk a little bit about console exclusivity. Now, we're not talking about the famous console exclusives that one platform may have over the other, but we're talking about exclusivity agreements that exist across the industry. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is console exclusivity itself. Now, this is when software is exclusive to one gaming platform and none of the others. Now, we're not talking about PC gaming, but in a lot of the industry, you will see the term console exclusive. When you see that, that usually means that it is going to be available on PC or sometimes, funny enough, even mobile gaming. So with that being a bigger area for gaming these days, that is coming across the industry. The other type of exclusivity that we're going to talk about is timed exclusives. Now, this is becoming more and more common, and some of those exclusive timed agreements are now kind of ending. So we're seeing some software kind of going cross-platform versus just on one. The other big exclusive agreement that you're going to see a lot in upcoming conferences, social media, etc. is marketing exclusivity. Now, this is going to be very common on the E3 stages of numerous not only developers, but also platform makers, so we'll talk about that in more detail shortly. The last exclusivity type agreement that we're going to talk about is DLC exclusivity. Now, this is usually when the same game releases on numerous consoles, and one game may have the DLC ahead of time or maybe exclusive DLC to one platform. So in understanding console exclusivity agreements, it's important to understand how development works. Now, when you're looking at the different tiers of developers, you have what's called a first party, a second party, and a third party developer. Now, first party developers have either originated or they've been acquired by a company that manufactures the actual console it develops for. Now, the Sony arm, or the Sony studio, is considered SIE, and that's Sony Interactive Entertainment. Some of the biggest ones that you've seen more than likely recently are Santa Monica Studios. They develop God of War. You have Guerrilla Games, who's developed Horizon Zero Dawn. They used to work on Killzone, which is kind of an interesting evolution. And then my personal favorite is Naughty Dog. They've done all the Uncharted's. They did the most recent Uncharted Lost Legacy. And my favorite game of all time still is The Last of Us. So they did that one, and that was specific to the Sony PS3 before being ported over to the Sony PS4. Microsoft, their studio name has changed a few times. It's currently Microsoft Studios. Now, they're going to develop all that exclusive content just for the Xbox One and PC. And the big studios that you can use as examples for that is 343 Studios, which does Halo. You have Turn 10, which is known for the Forza series, and then the Coalition that is known for the Gears of War series. Fantastic series there. Now, the big outlier here is Nintendo. They don't usually work, or do they actually acquire companies outside of their in-house studio, which is simply known as Nintendo Game Studios, I guess you could call them, or simply Nintendo. Now, one thing that's rare about them is that they will usually develop and create most of the game in-house, but they will partner with other studios. They do have other studios known as Retro Studios, you may have heard of. They worked some of the Metroid Prime games, and you have ND Cube. So they do things a bit different at Nintendo, and as you're going to hear in this actual explanation of how this works in the industry, Nintendo does things a lot different than Microsoft and Sony. Now, let's briefly talk about second-party studios. Now, these are usually developers that have exclusive publishing agreements with the manufacturers, but they do maintain the independence in their studios. Now, a lot of the Sony stuff that I was talking about a second ago, they actually started out as a second-party studio and were then acquired. So as I mentioned that, I will talk briefly about how Sony does it. So SIE, or Sony Interactive Entertainment, they tend to acquire a lot more studios for their exclusive content. Now, there is a few that work from time to time, but if you look throughout history, they usually will have a game that does really well, and then they'll buy them, and then they'll be part of the Sony Interactive Entertainment arm of Sony. Microsoft tends to partner with studios for exclusive content. So I'll give examples of that a little bit later, but something as like a Crackdown or other stuff like that, that is actually not a first-party studio, but they are a second-party, and they will make Crackdown solely for the Microsoft platform, whether that be Xbox One or Microsoft Store, which you can actually access via PC. They're going to work solely with them. Nintendo, as I did mention a second ago, they don't really have too many second-party stuff. They will, like I mentioned before, work with everything really in-house. Now, let's briefly talk about third party. So third party is usually where all the software sales really happen in gaming today. Now this is mainly due to the volume and the ability to play on multiple game consoles. If you picture your Call of Duty, of course that's not going to be exclusive to Sony, Microsoft, or obviously Nintendo, but you can play those games really anywhere. You can play them on PC, you can play them on PlayStation, and for that reason they're going to have the most sales. Now, every once in a while, exclusive does kind of jump into the top 10, top 3, top 5, whatever you want to consider, of that generation for a specific console. But it's usually very rare that that happens. If you look at the top 10 of where games are sold today, I think there's only 3 or 4 exclusives between both Sony and Microsoft that have actually pierced the top 10 that aren't cross-platform third-party. Now, there is something called time exclusivity, and that is actually something that is actually happening a lot more in gaming these days than it used to. Now, these timelines when it comes to the exclusivity agreement are not usually publicized, but every once in a while, if you do see a lot of outrage online because a specific game is not coming to that other console at the specific time, developers are forced to kind of mention, hey, it will be coming out on that other console. Now, this recently happened with the Rise of the Tomb Raider game, the sequel to the original rebooted Tomb Raider that came out in 2013. Now, it was originally released only on Xbox 360, Xbox One, and even PC. A lot of people were kind of outraged by this since Tomb Raider has historically been on PlayStation consoles. And when this happened on social media, the developers had to actually come out and say that they actually had a timed exclusivity agreement with Xbox. Now, roughly about a year after that came the Rise of the Tomb Raider 20-year celebration. It released actually both on the existing Microsoft consoles and also the PlayStation 4. You also saw this with Titanfall. If you remember, Titanfall was originally for the Xbox One. The sales didn't quite get to where Respawn wanted them to be, and for that reason, Titanfall 2 did come out cross-platform. So let's take a look at some exclusives that were third-party if they were exclusively timed. So let me define exclusively timed. That's usually when an agreement comes out, whether it be with Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo, and they'll say, we're going to release our game on your console. It'll be there for 1, 2, 3 years, and after that, us as a developer can publish it on a different manufactured console down the line. So games that's happened to is Tomb Raider, as I mentioned before. That was kind of a Xbox exclusive. You also had Dead Rising. So Dead Rising 3 was originally for only the Xbox One. Then when the most recent Dead Rising came out, that has also released on PlayStation 4. It released a bit later and did have kind of the complete edition. On the Sony side, you have No Man's Sky. So if you remember the E3 that was originally announced for, all the Sony fans were extremely excited, and they did spend quite a bit of time talking about how this is only coming out on the PlayStation 4. Well, guess what's coming out later this summer on the Xbox One? It is the complete fixed everything edition on Xbox One and Sony PlayStation 4. So that complete edition will be available for both. That was a timed exclusive. The other one that a lot of people have been really excited about is Hellblade. Now, Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice was one of my favorite games of 2017. It was about a 1-year exclusive for PlayStation 4, and you can now play that on the Xbox One. It did have all the glitches, everything removed. It's up to you on where you think the best experience is at between the Xbox One X and PlayStation 4 Pro. Now, the other game that is rumored to be coming out later in 2018 for the Xbox One that was originally a Sony timed exclusive is Nier Automata. One of the interesting things about that game is that it was also available on PC at launch, but it's mainly been played and talked about in the Sony PlayStation 4 realm. So that is kind of the overview of time exclusivity. These are agreements that are kind of good and bad for the industry. I won't really mention one way or the other. I'll let you decide on how you feel that is. So that is usually when third parties create that in the industry. Let's talk about marketing exclusivity. Now, in my opinion, this may be one of the most deceptive practices that currently exist in the industry today. To the average gamer, they rely on advertising, maybe conferences that happen like E3 or PAX or anything along those lines, but they also rely on social media to an extent to purchase their software or when they're purchasing that platform to play their games on. One thing to keep in mind is that marketing rights can be sold. So when this happens, potential buyers may assume that it can only be purchased on that respective platform. In many cases, that can lead maybe to a misinformed buyer and can really flame the fanboy wars that exist right now. I don't think fanboy wars have been this bad maybe since Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis existed a long time ago. So it's kind of crazy on how that happens. Now, how does this happen? And how are those marketing rights sold and kind of dispersed? Now, you may be watching a commercial on social media. You may be watching it on Twitter, Facebook, or maybe YouTube or something. And you'll see at the very end of the commercial, it can be very deceptive. It'll say, available for the PlayStation 4 or the Xbox One on X date, whatever it is. And little does the gamer that doesn't really follow the industry know, but it's also available on the other console. So I was recently watching the most recent Vampire trailer that just came out on the Sony PlayStation channel, and at the very end it says, available on PlayStation 4 on X date. Now, that game's a cross-platform game. It's not specific to Sony, and they're both going to release on the exact same dates on all the consoles. So when you're watching these types of conferences and upcoming game reels for each respective platform, watch closely as to how they're advertised and what is mentioned. If you see something that says in the upper corner at the bottom, wherever it is, that says console exclusive, that may mean that it's also releasing on PC. If you see something along the lines of available first on, this may mean that it's a timed exclusive or may get content first. So as we're talking about receiving content first, let's move over to DLC exclusivity. Now, this has been something that has been happening fairly often in the last couple years. If you do watch some of the conferences, you are fairly familiar with Destiny 1 and 2, you're familiar with Call of Duty as well. Now, Sony does have the marketing rights to both of these. So this has actually confused a lot of my friends in person and locally to me, thinking that Destiny was only available on the PlayStation 4. And oddly enough, to the casual gamer, a lot of people may have thought that Call of Duty is only available on the PlayStation 4. Now, here's the trick. They do receive DLC first before Xbox One does and PC does, but they do not receive any different content unless they are getting specific missions, maybe DLC that comes along with that game that will be reserved for that specific console. Now, this happened with Destiny 1. Initially, Sony had the exclusive DLC that was good for about a year. Now, the type of content that they were going to be getting ahead of time was a mission, there was a strike, there was a raid, and there was weapons. The initial agreement was that they would only have that for a year in advance, and it would later come to other consoles, in this case Xbox One. But Bungie didn't actually end up fulfilling that. They ended up not releasing that information until Destiny 2 launched. So a lot of people were kind of let down by that, maybe even burned. So with that being the case, they may be going only with Sony PlayStation 4 the next time, or PC. So those are some of the agreements that can be kind of seen in a negative light. Now, you will also see on the E3 stage that's coming up, they may be touting Destiny as their best game coming up or whatever that's coming up, and that'll confuse people too that don't follow the industry. They're going to think it's only going to release on that console. Now, it's important to remember that all these agreements are set up to have the edge over their competitor. Now, as I mentioned before, Nintendo is very tricky with this in the sense that they don't release their games on any console whatsoever outside of, in this case where we are today, the Nintendo Switch, maybe the 2DS or the 3DS, whatever you're doing on that handheld side. Very rarely, if ever, do they actually share any kind of content or even any of their specific characters on any other console whatsoever. And if you look at sales charts, Nintendo leads in overall sales on exclusive content by far. We were recently looking at Mario Kart 8 that released on the Wii U and Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, which released on the Nintendo Switch. If you combine those numbers, it far out exceeds any exclusive on any console today by far. So the Nintendo, I always struggle to kind of use them as competitors against Sony and Xbox, but I guess they kind of are. However, in my humble opinion, I do believe that Sony really competes against Xbox and Xbox competes against Sony, and Nintendo's kind of in their own category because usually a very passionate PlayStation or Xbox owner will buy the Nintendo Switch as their secondary console, You will rarely see someone that is extremely passionate and only plays Nintendo will go out and buy a PlayStation 4 or Xbox. So they kind of compete in different arenas, different audiences. The Switch is selling amazing, the PlayStation 4 is selling amazing, and the Xbox is slowly catching up if they ever catch up this generation. But as you're watching all these commercials, all this advertising, just keep in mind that there is really something going on in the background when it comes to agreements, and make sure that you try to educate yourself as best as possible. If you have any questions, please let us know in the comments below, and make sure to like and subscribe if you get a chance. Thanks.